Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, a big day for the President here in Washington, D.C., as tax reform finally goes through both houses here in Washington, and there's been a big press conference, and the President says growth in America is currently 3.1%. With these tax reforms, it's going higher still, and it's very interesting. Everywhere I go in this city, the economy is what people are talking about. The taxi drivers, the bartenders, they're all talking about the economy, and optimism is rising in this country very, very sharply, along with the stock market and everything else. Well, what of the UK economy? And it's very interesting because there are two very contrasting views that have been put out today. The first, by the International Monetary Fund, based, of course, here in Washington, D.C., and Christine Lagarde saying that the UK is clearly losing out as a result of the Brexit vote, and they've downgraded their forecast for the UK next year. They say growth next year will be 1.6%, not the 1.7% they had previously forecast, and they're clearly very concerned about what they see as the cliff edge Brexit. Have to say, I'm not a huge fan of the IMF. I did, in fact, hold up their charter in front of the European Parliament a few years ago, pointing out they should not be getting involved in bailouts of the euro. So I'm not a fan of them. But Forbes magazine have said something really very interesting. They put out every year an annual ranking for which are the best countries in which to do business. Last year, the United Kingdom was the fifth best place in the world to do business. For 2018, Forbes predict that the UK will be the best place, the number one country in the world in which to do business, and they measure that on taxes, red tape, property rights, innovation, and they particularly point out that despite concerns over Brexit, investment by top companies, including US technology firms like Apple, are big positives for our country. So you've got one slightly pessimistic view of what 2018 is going to bring, one really very optimistic view of what 2018 might bring. I'm asking you tonight, and when I had a job trading in commodities, we would ask people whether they were bullish or bearish. Did they think the market was going up or going down? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the UK economy for 2018? How does it feel to you? Tell me what you think the temperature of this is. You can do it by calling me on 0345 60 60 973. You can, of course, text to 84850. You can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and you can watch me on Facebook and comment there too. Are you optimistic or are you pessimistic? My own view is that I think things look okay for 2018. And I do think the UK is a good place to do business, but I think the indecision, the dithering by our government means we are not maximising on what the good bits of Brexit really could be. So I expect next year to be okay, but not particularly exciting. I think our growth will be certainly less than half that of the United States of America. And I suspect our productivity levels won't rise much either. So I'm not doom and gloom about it, but I'm certainly far from being excited. I wonder what Brendan in Nottingham thinks. Good evening, Brendan.
Hello there, Nigel. Thanks for taking my call. Basically, I'm optimistic. Now, I've had concerns about the IMF and particularly Christine Lagarde for some time. And I've done research on this, and it can be checked anywhere on the internet. And this is just a few examples. On the Times said they have a terrible forecasting record. The New York Post said they have a very poor economic track record. The Financial Times, an astonishing record of complete failure. Dean Baker of The Guardian, the left-wing paper, they said, why should we trust the IMF? That's his comment. And basically, they have a hit rate, a success rate of predicting problems of 3.3%. Now,
as high as that, Brendan? I'm amazed. I thought they were worse than that.
No, I was shocked as well. But also, there's Christine Lagarde, who was prosecuted in France in 2016 for financial irregularities. So, Nigel, why has...
I know there are, Brendan, I know there are a lot of legal issues around Christine Lagarde. I don't really want to go there for the purposes of this show, but I do agree with you that the IMF have got an appalling track record, and what really, frankly, has incensed me, Brendan, is the way that the IMF here in Washington have almost become a sort of outpost of the European Commission, because they were more than happy to get involved with bailing out the Eurozone when there was absolutely nothing in their charter to suggest they, are even able to do that. So should we, Brendan, just ignore them completely?
Yeah, I mean, basically, I'll just say one thing, Nigel. What really angers me is that when organisations like this, whose track record speaks for itself, are absolutely atrocious, they say something bad, pound goes down, markets go into free fall, etc., etc. Why don't these organisations say, take the notice of them, they have a terrible record, they don't deserve anyone's respect?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And Brendan, do you see any great threats to the UK economy for next year?
No, and to be honest, I'll be quite frank, all of this Brexit stuff, etc., no one said it's going to be easy. No one said, no one said, oh, we're going to have a growth of 50% a year and all that. We know it's not going to be easy. The EU will make sure it's not easy, but I know that together we can make this work.
Well, of course we can make it work, but the one thing that is missing is clarity, and one of the reasons I'm so against the transition period, which Monsieur Barnier made very clear today, means that you keep the same rights and obligations as being an EU member, is that we're delaying the day when we actually break free from this and can start making our own deals on our own rules. And I'd love to see us get out into that clear blue water and be in charge again. And sadly, I think that's going to take a very long time. Brendan, I thank you very much indeed for your call. Well, Brendan there saying he's got no respect for the IMF in any way at all because they simply get things wrong. And that's not to say, of course, that Forbes are necessarily right, but as a place to do business, we do have some amazing advantages. The language, the time zone, the legal system. There are many, many reasons why Britain is a good place to do business. Richard in Chelsea says, the IMF's financial forecast are about as accurate as Mystic Megs. And on Twitter I get, it would be the same with or without Brexit next year as we're still in the same position. Well, actually, of course, that's right, isn't it? Because we are still members of the European Union, although I would argue that we could do with some clarity, some certainty and some vision from the government as to where they want to take us. On Twitter I also get, I'm a big believer in positive thinking. Unlike the IMF, I am very optimistic about British performance in 2018. Evening, Nigel. I'm wholly optimistic and believe in our country, says John. Well, look, I believe in our country too, but I think there is one really big economic threat overhanging the British economy next year. I'll tell you in a moment what that is. Meantime, I'm going to ask Michael in Enfield what he thinks. Good evening, Michael.
I think, Nigel, that I was a borderline Remainer, but I could see both sides of the argument. And the thing that convinced me it was a bad idea is it's been ratified to me over and over and over again in the last few months, that if we had reasonable, intelligent people working for the greater good of their respective parties, i.e. the EU and the UK, this could all have worked out. But we have Barnier and May in charge of it, and the ruling party, all we've got to do is shout EU into a room and they break out into a fight. And that is the problem that you've led us into, that we do not have reasonable people in charge of either side of this argument. So it's going to be a blimmin' disaster. I really do believe that. For that
you think it'd be a disaster, Michael? Yeah, well, but I mean, whatever politicians do, Michael, business is still business, isn't it? People still buy things, people still go shopping, they want motor cars or drinks or whatever it may be. Do we sometimes, Michael, perhaps overestimate the importance of government in terms of our economy?
I think you would have to say that, Nigel, wouldn't you? But the reality of the situation is that politicians create the regulations and the environment from which business do succeed and failing, and they're doing an appalling job. And that just means to say that it's going to make the job of PLC UK that much harder to be successful, and that is where we're heading. Because it's going to be a bloody awful mess. Sorry, excuse me.
Yeah, a bit early yet, before the watershed and all that. No, Michael, look, I don't actually disagree with you. I think the government is making a complete hash of this. I think we need to get on with Brexit, to have the opportunity to reach out to a bigger, broader world, and to start talking up our country and its future and what we're going to be. And I fear, and it's very interesting that the European Commission, Barnier today, proposed that the transition period should be about 20 months. And Downing Street is saying they want it to be longer. So this transition period, Michael, in my view, will go on until the next election and maybe for years beyond that. And when you make a decision in life to go, it's that fork in the road moment. When you make a decision to go in one direction, what you have to do is go with it and try and make it a success. Michael, I thank you for your call. And Michael, they're very worried about what may happen over the course of the next year. And I do believe there is one really major, grave threat to the UK economy that could face us next year or the year after or the year after that, but it's there and it's very, very real. And in a moment, I'll tell you what it is. For now, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, live from Washington, D.C., and it's 7:15. Well, the IMF tell us that because of Brexit, they're downgrading our growth forecast for next year. But at the same time, Forbes say the UK is going to be the best place to do business in the world in 2018. Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Well, I think the UK is a good place to do business. I suspect that next year our growth is going to be pretty lackluster. I suspect that our comparisons with Germany, with America, particularly America, I would think will grow at less than half the level that America will next year. I don't see our productivity problem being dealt with, but I think things will be okay. I would like us to take more advantage of Brexit, to have more certainty, to show where we're going. But there is one big risk overhanging the UK economy, and it's not Brexit, because frankly we get wild exaggerations about what that may do to the UK economy, coming from the same people, incidentally, who told us that if we didn't join the euro it would be a disaster, and thank goodness we didn't in the end listen to them. No, the one really big problem overhanging the UK economy is political uncertainty. A Prime Minister that's already lost one major vote in the House of Commons, a Prime Minister in a very weak position, and a Labour Party that is currently 3 points ahead in the opinion polls that we saw at the last weekend. If this government fell and there was a general election, and even the prospect of people like Diane Abbott and John McDonnell getting near the money, then I think you would see a major downturn in the UK economy, a huge downturn in our stock markets. And I think the biggest risk to the country is a hard left, anti-business, high-tax Labour government in prospect. That is my view. That, I think, is the real risk that we face. I wonder what Shiv in Slough makes of all of that. Good evening.
Hi, good evening. I agree with definitely political changes will affect the economy. But I also think just us Brexiting in general will affect consumer confidence. And until we know what is happening with Brexit, and even a couple of years after potentially, that actually consumer confidence will affect the economy. People domestically and internationally aren't willing to take that risk at the moment.
So isn't that an argument, Shiv, for getting on with Brexit, for not having lengthy, perhaps almost endless transition periods, for getting on with it, making the break and getting on with the rest of our lives?
I think in the short term it does seem like a positive, but only if we manage to argue or agree a good outcome. It's worth putting in the argument and the time now if actually we come out with a positive and better response by the end of Brexit. The risk would be if we leave straight away and we don't come to an agreement in our favour.
Well, clearly, Shiv, I mean, what the Prime Minister wants is, a tariff-free deal with the European Union, which logic says, given they sell us 70 or 80 billion pounds of the goods more every year than we sell them, is what they should want too. The problem, Shiv, is that is coming at a very big price. There are 40 billion quite big reasons why this is expensive, let alone the role of the European Court of Justice, or continued open door immigration, or goodness knows what else she's going to surrender in order to get that tariff-free deal. But on the current trajectory, Shiv, it's going to be at least 2021 until we actually have our new relationship with the European Union. And I just think what we could do with is a bit more clarity in terms of where we're going.
Yes, definitely we agree on that. Clarity will bring back confidence and will drive the economy.
Yep. OK, Shiv, I thank you very much indeed for your call. Nigel, I think Christine Lagarde is about as reliable as an economic forecaster as the governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney. Oh, ouch, Andrew in Herne Hill. Or what about George Osborne? Remember him? He was the Chancellor of the Exchequer. He told us Brexit would be such a catastrophe, he'd need to put in place an emergency budget. Remember those days? Project Fear. Things will pick up when we start trading with the rest of the world outside the EU. Uncertainty are causing some shakiness in the markets. The IMF always get it wrong, says Hyder in Oakhampton. And Nigel, we in the USA are waiting for Brexit to conclude. Believe me, we want a very close economic relationship. And as soon as we do that, the British economy will boom. I get on Twitter from somebody here in the USA. And wasn't it interesting? Yesterday, after that telephone call between May and Trump, that the White House statement didn't even mention the future prospects of a trade deal between the United States of America and the United Kingdom, because the message I'm getting here in Washington is they don't take us seriously anymore. They thought Brexit last year meant, hey, we can start talking, we can do something, and they know it's at least going to be 2021 until any deal of any kind can be signed with the USA. Brian says, with all our trade with the rest of the world, the EU will be poor and will come crawling back to us, reckons Brahman. I don't know. Forbes are right, says James, because once we leave the EU, we can negotiate better deals around the world. Well, at the moment, I'm hearing more optimists than pessimists. And I'm optimistic overall, but I'm really, really worried about someone like John McDonnell becoming our Chancellor. When he's asked simple questions like, how much interest do we pay on the national debt every year? He says, that's what we have iPads for. That doesn't fill me with a huge degree of confidence, let alone Diane Abbott's arithmetic, as exposed by Nick Ferrari, of course, brilliantly during the general election campaign. Greg in Dartford, are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Well, I'm a Brexiteer, but I'm feeling a bit pessimistic, to be honest with you.
Yep.
I don't believe we're going to come out. I mean, the thing is, we were 18 months in after they signed Article 50, and we were supposed to come out in 2 years. They've had 2 years to negotiate anything, and it's been going round in circles and round in circles. And
Well, actually, Greg, one little point there. Article 50, of course, wasn't triggered until March of this year. So it was 9 months after the referendum that we triggered Article 50.
Okay, fair enough. But either way, it just seems to me all the people that are running the Brexit camp, the negotiations are Remainers. And the thing is that it doesn't help, and I'm sorry to sound a bit like a sort of conspiracy theorist here, but with the establishment, it kind of doesn't suit them to come out. It never has, which is why they campaign so absolutely adamantly to remain. And here we are, and it's sort of going around in circles, and I'm losing faith with it, and I think what we're going to end up with is we're not going to come out, and we're not necessarily going to be in, but we're not going to be out. We're going to have some sort of watered-down sort of deal that copes with all the issues that the establishment's got with it.
Brexit in name only, Greg. Brexit in name only.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's my biggest. That's my biggest fear too. Is that we finish up. Not able to set our own laws, our own conditions for our own industries, still paying large sums of money, having no say whatsoever, and not free to get out there to the rest of the world. I fear that too. So, Greg, basically, to sum up, the Brexit opportunity is being wasted, yeah?
Well, I don't know if it's been wasted. I think, I mean, I'm not going to say underhandedness, but I just think that the people, if you're absolutely adamant in your heart about something, you're not necessarily going to go out your way to fight for the other corner, regardless. It might be their job or whatever. It's not going to happen. And it doesn't suit. Why would you go into something 100% to negotiate something to get out when it completely is against your own agenda?
Well,
which is against their own agenda.
Greg, I agree with you totally. Seems to me that Brexit was an instruction to our government to turn around the ship of state by 180 degrees. And to do that, you have to believe in it. And, Mrs. May on the Ian Dale show a few weeks ago, when she was asked how would she vote now, couldn't say she'd vote for Brexit. Greg, I'm with you. Too many Remainers. They don't believe in what they're doing. More is the pity. But I thank you very much indeed for your call. We need to remain optimistic. If we can spend with confidence, this will help the economy. We need to have a dialogue with countries outside the EU, says Sheila. On Twitter, I think that the IMF can't accept that us leavers... well, OK, Chris, I get the point. The IMF themselves are not reconciled to Brexit. They are part of the globalist movement, and they hate Brexit, they hate Trump, and they really believe that we're all going to go back to normal, that 2016 was simply a bad dream, and they're wrong. And I'll tell you so a bit later on tonight why. Jason in Sutton, optimistic or pessimistic?
Nigel, what on earth are you on about? Going off to trade with the rest of the world? Seriously, you talk such a load of piffle. You really do. Think about
it. Well, Jason, I tell you what, Jason, right? 15% of the world economy is in the Eurozone, 85% is outside. So work that out.
Okay, 55% of UK exports go to non-EU countries around the world. That's more than half of our exports. You talk about a trade deal with the United States. The United States already take a quarter, 25% of UK exports that are sent around the world. You really think they're going to buy more British stuff? No, what they're looking for is a better trade deal with the UK, a better trade deal for them, not for the UK. And the same with everybody else. All of our trade that goes off to other countries around the world, you talk about trading everywhere and everywhere else, we trade under EU-negotiated trade deals as our part of our EU membership status. How many countries can you name that we can have a new trade deal with where we don't already have an excellent trade relationship? Name 5 for me.
Oh, well, the United States of America and so on and so forth.
Stop you there. Let me stop you there.
And Japan is an interesting one, Jason, because the Swiss managed to get their trade deal with Japan in place over a decade ago. So the point about EU negotiated barrier-free trade is this, Jason. They're very bad at it. They're very slow at it. And if you look at Switzerland, you look at Singapore, you look at South Korea, you look at Chile, they have negotiated far more deals across the world that they're happy with than we've managed to as a European Union bloc. So what I'm arguing is we'll have much more flexibility when we're in charge of our own trade policy.
Well, let's take the USA, for example. That was the first one you mentioned. Between the EU and the United States, there are nearly 200 separate agreements which make trade easier. They remove barriers to trade in terms of research, in science, technology, nearly 200 agreements that have been put in place since the early 1990s, nearly 20 years ago. Now, that's how you build up a trade deal around the world with other countries. You don't just do it on a whim in a couple of years. These things take building blocks and foundations to be done properly.
Jason, do you think that the trade deal we have with the EU is advantageous, but that other deals around the world wouldn't be?
If we're already trading with these other nations all over the world, including Japan, including South Korea, including South America, and the other trade blocks, because don't forget, most countries in the world trade under trade block agreements. They don't just trade under WTO rules.
Well, it's some and some, isn't it? Yeah, it's some and some. I mean, Jason, look, I'm struck. Look, a lot is talked about trade deals, but I'm struck that America and China trade with the whole of Europe without any trade deal at all. Jason, I got to go to the news. It's 7:30. Well, with conflicting opinions about what's going to happen to the UK economy next year, I'm asking you whether you're optimistic or whether you're pessimistic. But this morning, some quite disturbing news coming from the north of England. Detectives are questioning 4 men held after raids that took place this morning to stop a suspected Christmas terror plot. The arrests were made in a series of coordinated raids in South Yorkshire and Derbyshire, and the Army's bomb disposal unit was dispatched to an address in Chesterfield and later sent to a community centre and a mosque in Sheffield. The immediate area around the Chesterfield property was cordoned off and residents evacuated as officers carried out searches. The cordon has since been reduced, but the property remains sealed off. All 4 were arrested on suspicion of being concerned in the commission, preparation or instigation of acts of terrorism under Section 41 of the Terrorism Act 2000. Intelligence sources have told ITV News that the timing of the raids was significant and a suspected plot was imminent. Raids come as extra security is being stepped up for festive events such as Christmas markets, and the threat of terror attacks is something that is being anticipated by anti-terror officers. And that very much links in with some really fascinating research that has come out this morning of Eurobarometer. Eurobarometer, which is in fact funded by the European Commission, which tests across Europe public opinion on a whole series of issues. And when people were asked in this poll, the 2 issues that people in the European Union said were of greatest concern were not the economy, not the threat of unemployment. No, there's been something really big happening here, because 38% in this poll said the threat of terrorism and 39% picked immigration. And what's amazing about this is if you compare those figures for 2017 to 2012, in 2012, 4% named terrorism as their biggest concern, and 8% said immigration. So 4% and 8% have gone to 38 and 39%. And I can, assure you of one thing. Any of you listening to this, watching this tonight, who really dislike Brexit, who can't bear Donald Trump and want to think that what happened in 2016 was a nightmare and it's all over, those polling figures and what has been happening in Austria and the Czech Republic and elsewhere say to me, you ain't seen nothing yet. The global revolution of 16 is still rolling, and it's got a lot further to go. Let's move on. Let's go to Frank in Twickenham, who's a new caller to the show. Good evening, Frank.
Evening, Nigel.
So, how does it look, Frank? Good. You're optimistic, are you? Yep.
Yeah, and I've got to say, I'm reassured to know that we've got your voice to carry us forward, because I'm sick and tired listening to the IMF, CBI, Bank of England, so much doom and gloom, even before Brexit, how much spill was they pulling out, and they still couldn't win the vote. We voted out, and we're going out.
But Frank, these people, Frank. I mean, you're slagging off the CBI and the IMF. These people are all experts, Frank.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, they're so right, and they're going to be so wrong again. And what I'd like to say, Nigel, is I want to see us take a leaf out of Donald Trump's book and cut the taxes, and they can do that by getting rid. When we come out of Brexit, why are we still paying VAT? Why isn't VAT abolished and renamed?
Well,
and bring it down from current 20%. I like it actually down to 0, but 10%.
Actually, Frank,
start with 15%. Why is
Frank, you raise a good point, and very, very few people would know that the reason we went for a VAT system is because on the 1st of January 1973, we joined the common market. We did not have VAT before we joined the common market. And you're right, Frank, we could, with Brexit, if we chose to, scrap the VAT system and replace it with a sales tax of some kind. Would you think, Frank, that would be a better, fairer system?
Yeah, that would be right. But I've no doubt we're going to end up, we're going to end up paying the EU a get out clause, some of the money, or a backhand, or protection racket money, whatever you want to call it. We're going to have to
a ransom.
So use that
Let's call
money,
it a ransom.
pay 'em off,
Yeah.
and after that, then scrap the VAT.
Well, I mean, the government would still need to raise revenue, and there would need to be a sales tax. Whether that could be collected at the point of wholesale, not retail, is something I think that's worth looking at. But certainly, VAT is a pretty onerous system, particularly for many small businesses. And, Frank, you know, we may be better off without it. I thank you very much indeed for your call. Dear Mr. Farage, would you please get off the PM's back and criticising her? You clearly have a big problem with her, and you're trying to destabilise her. Yeah, I got 40 billion problems with her. 40 billion quid's worth of problems with her. I've got a problem that the Prime Minister, who stands up there, gives a big speech at Lancaster House, fights a general election, tells us she's going to take us into Brexit, tells us all the things we're going to do, is now giving in on issue after issue and signing us up to a transition deal, which is just a worse form of EU membership. So, yeah, I do have a problem. I don't want Mr Corbyn taking over control of the economy, and I think Labour have made it very clear that they would keep us stuck inside the single market and the customs union. That's the direction that party, I'm afraid, has now gone in. But I still take the view that every day Theresa May is in Downing Street, Jeremy Corbyn gets a little bit closer. I think they need somebody who comes in with a fresh start and actually believes in carrying out Brexit. And if they found that person, my view is they would carry the country, because there's 4 to 5 million Brexit Labour voters out there who I think, although it's difficult for many Labour voters to vote Tory and vice versa, I think if enough of them said, do you know what, Brexit matters more than our usual tribal loyalty, a Tory leader that inspired some of those people to vote for them would win the next election with a big majority. That is my view. Nigel, people didn't complain when the IMF said the UK was the fastest growing in the G7. Now you cite Forbes. This is the economy, Nigel, not a beauty contest, says Dr. Ralph. Dr. Ralph, all I've said, I've been critical of the IMF's political role that it's played during the Eurozone crisis and through the bailouts. And I'm suspicious, frankly, of all these big global organisations. I think they tend to be rather too fat on public money. Life is a little bit too easy. Paul says to me on Twitter, I trust the IMF before Forbes. Well, you know, you pays your money, you takes your choice. You're bullish, you're bearish. You're optimistic, you are pessimistic. You are called Rupert in Maidenhead, and you're a new caller to the show. How do you feel, Rupert?
Good evening, Nigel. Just actually saying, it's a pleasure to speak to you for the first time. I listened to your show quite a bit, so
welcome.
I've got some bad news for you, Nigel. I am a Ramona.
Oh dear! Oh gosh!
Oh,
right,
dear,
I will brace myself for the assault. Okay,
yes.
Rupert, you're on LBC. This is your chance to attack me.
Well, thank you, Nigel. I'd just like to say that, obviously we've talked about the referendum. I've listened to your show a number of times, and, we've talked about, this isn't the Brexit we voted for. There was no ballot on the paper saying hard Brexit or soft Brexit. But in truth, we never should have had the referendum in the first place. And the reason is that if you go back to 2008 or 2009, William Hague said in the House of Commons that a referendum is done based on the constitution that it's voted upon, i.e., if we vote to stay in or leave, we've got to have a plan and a strategy to do it. David Cameron said, right, you can vote stay or leave. People voted to leave, which they're entitled to do. And then he went, oh, crap, I don't know how to do this. You know what? I'm going to resign. And then, obviously, Theresa May came in. She was quite clearly a Remainer, still is a Remainer.
Oh yeah,
she's doing everything in her power to stay in the EU. And in truth, because we haven't got an idea of vision with Theresa May or the cabinet at the moment, because I believe 17 of the 25 were voted to remain.
I think it was 18 actually, Rupert. But anyway, whatever. I get the point.
It could be 25. And the thing at the moment, Nigel, is that, as this goes on, as we see the days being pushed back, as we clearly see more and more things come to that clearly say we're staying in the EU, like the European Court of Justice, the single market. It's quite clear that
you're just depressing me, Rupert.
I know,
but I think you're right. I think you're right. I think effectively this Prime Minister is trying to keep us in. We're going to finish up, Rupert, with you as a Remainer and me as a Leaver, and both of us unhappy, aren't we?
Yeah, I'm absolutely fuming. But for me, I can see a great future for England, because I see the next few years the Conservatives make an absolute balls up of this. To the point where we don't leave the EU. The next election comes round, and it's all Labour, all together now, Nigel. Oh, Jeremy Corbyn.
All I can say is help, because if we get Corbyn and McDonnell and Diane Abbott, then you really will, Rupert, see businesses and people leaving the United Kingdom. That's what I believe. Come on and tell me I'm wrong. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, live from Washington, D.C., and it's 7:45. So where are we going? The IMF say Brexit's hurting us bad, holding us back. Forbes magazine say we've gone to the top of the rankings as a place to do business. What is the outlook for 2018? Alex says on Facebook, if Forbes says Britain will succeed more after Brexit, and they are a millionaires magazine, they obviously know what they're on about. I wouldn't be so sure, Alex. I promise you, you cannot judge people's intelligence or ability to predict the future by whether they live in big houses or small houses. I know that from going out knocking on doors. Shazwellin says the effect of Brexit is scaring the world economy. Well, I tell you what, Shazwellin, it's not scaring anybody here in the USA. The economy here is booming, because they're deregulating, they're bringing jobs back to this country, and you can hate President Trump, you can dislike him as a person, but nobody could disagree that he has not brought back hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs to this country. It is happening, and it happens with a constant positive message. You know what the Donald's like? It's going to be great, guys. It's going to be huge. But constantly, he and his administration talk up the prospects of their country. I don't see any of that optimism in Westminster, frankly, at all. I wonder what Nick in King's Lynn thinks. Nick, good evening.
Hello, Nigel. Well, as soon as I heard those IMF findings on the news this morning, I thought I'd don't often tune into you. But I thought, I bet Nigel Farage is going to be raving away at this tonight. And I'm right. And
have I been... now, Nick, have I been raving?
I think so, yes. It's so predictable now. Now, why would the International Monetary Fund, 189 countries, of which have constantly surveyed statistics and analysis of all their economies, why would it have it in for the United Kingdom? Just because
Nick,
there must be something right.
Yeah, no, Nick, because they've become political. That was why, I said this earlier, that was why I held up their charter in the European Parliament to point out that they were politically getting involved in bailouts of the Eurozone, which was not what they were set up to do, and they are overtly political, globalist, anti-Brexit.
I wouldn't say that. Well, okay, get away. Okay, political. Every economic organisation has a political element about it. But basically, what's its whole role? It's to foster global monetary cooperation, financial stability, international trade. Now, why would it say these things about the British economy through Brexit if it didn't have a point?
Well, it did, of course, Nick. To be fair, it did, during the referendum itself, speak out repeatedly, telling us what a total catastrophe Brexit would be, didn't it?
And they're right.
Are they?
Yeah.
Are they?
Right.
So,
look at it.
You think... So why has the UK economy not crashed yet? Do you think it's sort of waiting until we finally leave?
Obviously, I don't want it to crash, but...
No.
Let's face it, Brexit hasn't happened yet. We've taken 16 months to get through this first phase, and even that was only because the European Commission felt sorry for May, so they said, right, let it go into the second stage, of which is where the meat of it is all this, is trade, and that's just to fall apart, because under nowhere, where are all these trade deals coming from? Where are all these special trade...
Nick, all I can say, I'll say it again, have a look at what Switzerland is able to do. Little Switzerland is able to negotiate more trade deals across the whole of the world than this big bloc called the European Union. So it's up to us as a country. You know, I mean, Brexit, I've never said, Nick, Brexit guarantees success for our country. What it does do, it puts us back in control, us in charge of the levers over our own destiny. And I'd rather we were in charge than the European Commission.
Why did we go in the common market in the first place, Nigel?
Because we were lied to, Nick. That's why. We were lied to. We were told it was purely about reducing tariff and about business and about trade. And it's very clear that was what the big party leaders said, you know, back in 1975 in that referendum. And we finished up, Nick, in a political union. And just look at what's happened to Poland today. Article 7 of the European treaties has been invoked today. Poland no longer have any voting rights in Brussels. They are now a vassal state of the European Union because Brussels doesn't like them getting rid of a whole load of former communist judges. Nick, you know, ultimately, the EU is not about economics. It's actually about politics. Nick, I thank you for your call. And, you know, Nick, they're very pessimistic about what Brexit will do. Santosh is calling me from Gillingham in Kent, and she's a new caller. Good evening.
Hello, Nigel. Thanks for taking my call.
Not a bit, not a bit.
Now, we've got to accept that David Cameron offered a referendum, perhaps to win the election, and he abandoned a sinking ship when the vote didn't go according to what he wanted. Yeah?
Well, he did, Santosh, but even worse than that, he and Osborne didn't make any contingency plans for a leave vote. And that really was dereliction of duty, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I agree with you. But we as a country have to now remember to the forefront, what we've got is a Brexit vote. Some people might not like it, but that's just the way it is. And we have to embrace that. It might cost us money. We have no choice in that matter as a population because we probably didn't know all the nitty-gritty when people voted, because that information probably wasn't given to us on how much it may cost the country if we did leave.
Well, Santosh, it doesn't have to cost us anything. We could just say goodbye if that's what we chose to do. But, you know, the Prime Minister is following her route and she's prepared to pay 40 billion for it.
Okay, but also, I don't think we should have a go at Mrs May. Now, Mrs May won the election and has got a coalition government because she didn't get the majority. But as a country, we need to be positive. We've got some great things in this country. People working in industry. We've got the Mr Dysons. We've got the Richard Bransons and many other. We should showcase our health service has got some great people, education, the emergency services, finance, you know, legal eagles. We've got so much. We've got so many skilled people out there, and we need to get everybody on board and think this is the way we take our country forward. Now, one of my analogies is how did England win the World Cup in '66? They played as a team. And it wasn't England. In fact, it was West Ham that won the World Cup. But we'll come to that.
They always say that. Ian Dale certainly says that as a West Ham supporter. Santosh, I get the point about optimism, about teamwork. I just doubt we've got the right captain, that's all, which maybe is a bit negative. I don't know. Sarah is my next caller, my last caller from Hereford. Hello, Sarah.
Hello. Nice to speak to you.
Good evening. Good.
Hi,
so, Sarah, how do you see the future?
The reason I'm ringing in is because actually how I currently feel, I feel our democracy is being compromised.
Right.
The government is kind of taken us by stealth slightly, and it's a very kind of subtle overtaking of what we feel is British citizens, is that when we vote, we're voting for what we think we are voting for. However, we voted 80% for the Conservatives and Labour for Brexit, and I feel we're completely being fed a yarn. You know, it's totally terrible of what's happening. Is that everything we believe in, every war we've been into, the First War, the Second World War, everything that we've stood for as British people, has been compromised because we can't actually believe in our government. We
Do
can't
you know,
do
Sarah,
anything they say.
85% of the votes cast in the general election were for parties that said we should leave the European Union, leave the single market, and end the free movement of people. And here we are, just 6 months afterwards, and you're right, there is a crisis of democracy in our country. I thank you very much, Sarah. Tomorrow, the Catalans vote. It's neck and neck between those who want to separate and those who don't. We'll look and talk about Catalonia tomorrow. And John on Facebook says, in reference to Rupert's call, hold on a second, did I just hear a Remainer being civil? Miracles can happen. The whole point of LBC is, whatever your view, we can have a civilised, grown-up debate. Sometimes. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. I'm back tomorrow night at 7. Coming up tonight at 10, it's Ian Collins. But up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you.